Web3 interview, where we bring you the latest news and insights from the world of blockchain and crypto. I'm your host, Veronica, and joining us today is Mr. Brendan McKittrick, founder and chairman at Aerobloc, a decentralized Web3 ecosystem that supports digital development in solving age-old problems in aviation. Mr. Brendan has been in the aviation industry for long enough to witness the slow demise in airlines' profits due to rising costs and heightened competition. He is here with us to share his insights on how blockchain, Web3, and AI will transform the aviation industry. Thanks for joining us today, Mr. Brendan. How are you?
I'm very well, Veronica. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so let's dive right into our interview. So for the first question, Aerobloc, as the name says, combines blockchain technology with civil aviation. But how does it work?
So blockchain shouldn't be a solution looking for a problem. So the best way to approach any revitalization of a vertical industry is to look at the deep-rooted problems. And in a previous job, I ran the global ticket settlement system in my ex-company as the global CTO. And that was outsourced from IATA, the governing body of aviation. So we processed about $250 billion of tickets a year in a very centralized system, which was quite old. And the problem with centralized systems is that they have single points of failure. There's usually huge volumes in very, very concentrated amounts of processing and so forth. And it also means that the industry kind of has central points of basically where the industry hasn't allowed peer-to-peer development. You haven't allowed airlines to interact with each other and so forth. So the high centralization isn't always good for industries. It was the solution of the old days where we had central banks, chambers of commerce, verifying things. So we always had a middleman to solve the problem for the industry. With blockchain, you don't need a middleman. With blockchain, people can settle peer-to-peer without having to trust each other because blockchain provides that level of trust abstraction. So blockchain is very powerful when it's used across an industry. But it's also the challenge is to get a whole industry to adopt it as well. So you have to do that very smartly to get folks onto the system in a systematic way without asking everybody to join at the same time.
So blockchain and innovation is really new now, right? Aviation itself is already tech savvy. So wouldn't blockchain make that even more complex in the aviation?
No, it simplifies things. The aviation industry was one of the first movers on the planet. So in the late 50s, there was a design between IBM and American Airlines to be able to interline inventory from different airlines. And that was the beginning of a system known as Sabre, which the core system was built in the 1960s. So what we've had is layers and layers of systems built since then over the decades. So it's become really, really complex. So what blockchain does is it takes out the need for so many middlemen and simplifies the processing, because if you and I can interact peer-to-peer, we don't need to use that legacy stack. So it avoids the huge amount of complexity. You're right, it's very complex. I wouldn't say it's very sophisticated. There's some really good programs that were ahead of their time. So the aviation industry led the world in many aspects of technology. But because of that, it's entrenched in old legacy systems, which have aged a lot now, a bit like banking has found itself. And then you have the DeFi coming into banking. Now you have the decentralized solutions coming into airlines, which simplify things, not make them complex. So think of a smart contract, for example. If a passenger is flying on two airlines and they have a smart contract of how to handle a passenger across two different airlines, they no longer need a middleman to figure out who gets which part of the ticket from the revenues. It's all in the smart contract that they both agree to. And the smart contract is encrypted by both their digital certificates, which means nobody can read that smart contract, only them.
Okay, I'm really sorry with that. But anyway, so aside from that benefit, so we see blockchain making it easier for the aviation industry in general, right? So for airlines, how does Aerobloc help reduce red tape?
Okay, so the airlines, okay, let's look at the global market. The global ticket is something less than $200, the average ticket across the whole industry. Averages can be dangerous. You know, a man drowned in a river that was 1 inch deep on average, right? So averages don't really show you the swings and the ups and downs. But let's just take the average for the purpose of illustration. So the average ticket is always just below $200 globally. But the profit that the airline makes is sometimes between $6 down as low as even $3.
Okay.
So the profitability, swings between up to 3% down, less than to maybe 1.5%. So that's very little money. So out of the $100 that flows through the system from the customer buying the ticket, only about $3 makes it into the account of the airline as profit. The rest is eaten up. So 24%, these are average figures, and they go up and down. I'm going to use figures pre-COVID because they're probably going to go back to these figures. So pre-COVID, on average, 24% of the ticket is eaten up by fuel for the aircraft. 24% is eaten up by salaries to make the journey happen. And then there's about 3% profit, as I mentioned, but there's about just under 50% is all the other costs from landing charges at the airport and so forth. But it also includes a good chunk of middlemen, folks who touch that ticket along the journey and take their piece. So those folks make a hell of a lot more than the airline does. Now, the airline buys the asset, buys the plane, plays, they pay billions on their fleet, they train their pilots, they do all the necessary provisions to create that fleet, make it airworthy, MROs, maintenance and all of that. And they also take the liability if anything happens or goes wrong. But they make the smallest profit. And that's where the problem lies for the airlines. And what blockchain allows it to do is the airline to transact directly with the customer, but also to collaborate with competitors. Because the reality is airlines need to compete and collaborate at the same time. So the fares are always going up and down. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I got it clearly. Thank you for that. But how about for us passengers? How will you help us make flying cheaper and comfortable?
So if you take out those middlemen, that's the point I was just making, you reduce the cost to deliver that ticket. And if you increase the profitability for the airline, it gives them more scope for cheaper tickets, right? So airlines they're used to working on a very marginal amount of the ticket. So if they can lower the costs, you effectively give them more scope on the sliding rule to reduce those fares, because airlines do like to reduce fares to increase the load factor on the airplane. Because there's a lot of people who don't fly sometimes because of the pricey. If tickets are pricey, there's a lot of folks who don't fly. And by just lowering the price, because of leisure travel, sometimes people spontaneously travel, or they plan their holidays, more salubriously or less salubriously, depending on air tickets. So as the tickets get lower, they attract more passengers. So they're happy to do that because it pushes more folks into the country as tourists, it puts more people through the airports, and it also gives them a wider spread of passenger numbers, which is always good for airlines. So blockchain, by reducing the costs indirectly, has an effect on the ticket price. It does bring it down.
Okay, so it all goes down to the price now, cutting down middlemen.
So there is a benefit for customers for sure.
Yeah. So with your background in aviation, I've seen you have a lot of years of background in it. What inspired you now to leave the corporate world and start your own company?
Yeah, you're right. I was in quite a comfortable position, and maybe it was too comfortable. I was with the largest ticket processor in the world, and I was the global CTO. And we had 350 airlines. So every time I went to bed at night, I said a little prayer that all our airlines would be all happy when I woke up, and maybe I only slept 4 to 6 hours a night. But I love aviation, so I love all that. I love traveling to the airlines. But the more I talk to the C-level folks in the airlines, the executive guys making the decisions, I began to understand that their toolbox is very old. Their aircraft are quite modern. Airplanes, let's be clear here, aircraft and the avionics are quite sophisticated and modern and very safe. But it's the back-end systems that do all the management and the reservation and so forth. They're quite old in a lot of cases. And even if they're new on the front end and the UX looks good, they still have to talk to these legacy systems. So there's a lot of bodies in there wiring this stuff up. And it makes it quite clunky and unresponsive to passenger needs. So my motivation was, I want to make a difference here. I just want to sit back and have a comfortable job. I love aircraft and I love, all the buzz. So I went out and started from scratch. And basically the idea was to bring in these new technologies like artificial intelligence, distributed, decentralized ledger technologies, and also, tokenization, digital wallets, Web3. How can we create a new experience? But we have to build it from the bottom up. So we need to go and change the core systems, which is what we've started doing. We've started changing some of the core systems and starting to rewrite them.
So despite these good things, are you seeing any hurdles in implementing blockchain in aviation?
Not in aviation, because we're kind of one of the first movers. There's a few folks out there. There's one company doing part tracking and part provenance and lineage. There's another company, so that's Block Aviation. And there's another company called TravelX, and what they're doing is they're selling NFTs, selling tickets as NFTs on airlines, which is really exciting. There is a group who built a blockchain called Camino, which is for travel. So there's early movers, and we don't see ourselves as competitors. We all have to collaborate to change this big industry. So we're at a very exciting time, a pioneering time where people work together. And any opportunity I have, I always promote those folks because I think they're doing a great job. Our role in that ecosystem is we want to create that fundamental platform for the industry where the likes of these projects can live and have all those interfaces into the legacy systems, and to have payment systems, digital wallets, all white labeled available there, and multiple choices as well, not necessarily one. And the platform will be owned by the aviation industry, not by me or anybody else. It'll be owned by the aviation industry, governed by the aviation industry, and it'll also have a governance structure where you have validators. And the validators could be an airline, it could be an airport, or any other major stakeholder in aviation. So that means the ecosystem is very native to aviation.
So looking ahead, like maybe 5 to 10 years, how do you see blockchain in relation to the aviation industry? Do you think it will revolutionize, like it will be the head of all aviation?
Blockchain is not a revolutionary technology. I know this is a bit controversial, but for me, I was lucky enough to work in the early 90s on mainframes. I didn't think I was so lucky at the time because I wanted to work on all these new PCs, but I did work in IBM as a consultant on mainframe. And so I saw all of these systems, in their primary stages. I also saw the first PCs. I was lucky enough to go to a school in Ireland that had the first computer in the 70s, late 70s, which was given ironically or appropriately by an airline, Aer Lingus. And folks were able to put in punch cards and things like that. Now, when I arrived into the school in 1980, that machine was in its last year. We moved to PCs. So the first PCs that came out, I think they were BBC Acorns, and Apple Macs sort of came after. There was a whole and then there was home computers like Commodore 64. So I saw all of these things coming. And at that stage, email was a new thing. The internet was only being born. The web is only, hadn't even started. So I see all these things coming in. So blockchain uses a lot of those legacy things. So one of the things is the blocking of data. There is a system on the IBM mainframe I used back in the day called VSAM. VSAM was virtual sequential access method, which is basically blocks of data linked from block to block using the previous address, which is exactly like blockchain. Excuse me. And then also the cryptography, which is exactly what we've used for years and years and years, using an algorithm, I think it was called the Reyndal algorithm, developed in Leuven in Belgium back in the day. So a lot of the legacies in blockchain are not new. A lot of the technologies are not new. They're legacy technologies. But it's the way it's used because of the cheap processing power. We can put a network of 100,000 computers together, call it a blockchain, and it's very hard to corrupt that 100,000 good actors because you have to corrupt 50% or more before you actually can sway or change or corrupt the data. And that's very difficult to do. So the blockchain is not a brand new technology, but it is evolutionary, let's call it, rather than revolutionary. So I think what it'll do is it'll start to be seen as a solution, but you do need a platform. There's no dedicated aviation platform out there. And that's where we think we play a big role.
So
if that
yeah,
makes sense.
those are amazing insights. Actually, it's quite a lot, but you made it easier for us to understand how will you incorporate blockchain to aviation industry. So before we wrap up, do you have any parting words to our viewers? Anything you want to say?
Yeah, folks are. Yeah, no. Look, whilst I'm arguing that blockchain is not revolutionary, more evolutionary,
Mhm.
I would really urge people to get involved in understanding what it does. And so we actually have a foundation as part of Aerobloc, if I may add, Veronica.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
It's called Wings and Prayers,
Mhm.
and we're going to take a portion of our tokens, a large portion,
Okay.
and Wings and Prayers will use that money to leverage the assets of the aviation industry to repatriate children who've been trafficked illegally, to bring them home to their families.
Yeah, that's a great cause. It's really a great cause. I hope it.
I believe so, yeah. And that's where crypto could be very positive if it's used in the right way by
If
good
you use it in
actors.
the right way.
And
Agree.
we hope to benefit it. That will benefit
Yes.
thousands, if not millions, of children.
Yes. Thank you for that. Thank you for your amazing insights. Again, it's a pleasure having you with us today.